Welcome to Automates, the podcast that brings you musings from thought leaders and industry pioneers who are shaping the way we work, think, and succeed. Each episode is packed with insights, expert interviews, and practical tips that will inspire and empower you to take your business to the next level. So tune in, subscribe, and get ready to innovate with Automates. Hello, Catherine. How are you?
I am very well, Ben. I'm super excited to be chatting to you today.
Excellent. I'm really happy to be chatting to you as well. So this is attempt 2. So, I mean, it's fine. We'll all be good. We'll all be good today. So this week is a big week. It's always a big week around middle of October because it's Legal Geek Week. And I know you're going. And I thought what we'd do is we'd start with a quick sort of thing about a little bit about you, because obviously Legal Geek's not as important as you are, but I think it's a reflection of Legal Geek sort of just epitomizes some of the things that I've seen for years from coming from you, like the passion for sort of legal excellence and driving everything forward and community and everything else. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you? Because, I mean, most people know you, most people do, but anyway, though some people might not. So tell us about you, and then we'll jump into Legal Geek and we'll see where we get to.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm so excited about Legal Geek. Little bit about me. I'm the CEO and founder of BAM Legal, which sounds grand, but it's not, because BAM Legal is really me plus some expert subcontractors that I surround myself with. So it's a funny title to give yourself when there's just really you. But we are legal consultants, legal tech consultants. So we help large law firms and in-house legal teams. And I personally specialize in document automation. So automated drafting of contracts and other legal documents. Been doing that for 10 years as BAM Legal for lots of different firms and in-house teams. And before that, I was at Pinsent Masons doing it for them. And even longer ago, I was in practice for a short amount of time before I realized that it definitely wasn't the future I wanted for myself. Legal Geek, you're so right. For me, it's just all about the community, and it's the one conference event of the year where we all get together to listen, to learn, to share ideas, promote, but really a little bit of it is about letting our hair down and giving everyone a hug and going, well done, pat on the back, great to see you. And, oh, isn't it nice that we're not the only ones out there striving to bring this whole community forward and bring the entire legal industry forward and progress the way we deliver services. So yeah, for me, it's always a real highlight and one I look forward to. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not speaking this year, which means that I get to just go and relax and learn. Beth very, very kindly said it was totally cool for me to have a year off. And I have various different reasons for that in terms of what I'm kind of thinking about and I'm working on at the moment. But so I'm just really looking forward to going and seeing everyone, listening to what everyone's working on, hearing everyone's hard problems and gnarly stuff they're trying to fix. And I don't know about you, but I've noticed that the agenda this year, refreshingly, seems to be less about what's possible and future gazing and more about the how and the actual things that people are doing. So I think that's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, and I well, first of all, I completely agree. I think I love the buzz that Jimmy and Beth have managed to create around 2 days in a usually dreary London sort of weather-based kind of situation. But no, they've done an amazing job, and I think it's always you're right. It is about the community. It's about the people. But I think it's fostering that kind of sharing atmosphere, because it's not so stuffy, it's a really chilled environment, so you sort of people are more open to sharing, they're more open to having conversations about what is hard today, what are they struggling with, what is it like that's driving stuff forward. I think one of the things that I sort of like is that it brings sort of all the players that create this ecosystem together. So you've got the big tech, and you've got the big guys, and you've got the law firms, you've got the law firm customers, but then you've got these little pockets of sort of expertise, like you guys at BAM and everything else. But actually, I often think of the little cogs as the ones that are driving most of the change and most of the hard yards, if that makes sense, because we're the experts. I say we. I'm not. You're the experts, if that makes sense. So you're the ones that are coming in, and you're coming in solving a particular problem, driving something forward in a particular way. And I think that's what's really good to see, because it isn't just big tech and law firms and a smattering of their clients. It's everything. But I think it's those little cogs that fit around the big ones that are the most important in keeping things running around.
I've been described as many things in my life, but never a little cog. I quite like it. I'm gonna,
But they're
yeah,
the most
might go as
important
a,
ones. They're the most important ones. You see the big ones, but actually the ones that keep
yeah,
everything
yeah,
else
yeah.
moving, it's the little ones that are really important. And a little
Love
cog,
that.
that's how my brain works. It's not
I
necessarily, I
like
could have
it.
thought of something more grand, but I think it's one of those things that I look at the industry, and I think there is a rise of sort of small, really focused, really passionate um, people and therefore businesses that are driving change and driving sort of things around. So I think it's part of the reason why I look at you and I look at what you do and I go, you're at the top of your game, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
And I just think it's an approach. It's a way you do business. It's how you think about things, and I think it's really important.
Thank you. It's a unique kind of situation and position to be in because when you work in kind of like legal tech, legal innovation, knowledge management within a law firm or legal ops in-house,
Yeah,
you can see all the tech and see all the demos out there, but you don't really fully see kind of the whole market and what's working within your competitors and what's not. You can talk to a couple of your competitors and they might tell you and they might not. What's nice for us is we get to see like all of the tools, but we get to see all of the tools being used or being piloted in practice.
yeah,
And we get to hear the feedback that customers don't tell the vendors directly. So
yeah.
the vendors kind of are great with us and share with us because we hopefully give them that usual, that quite hard feedback sometimes, but in a very like anonymized and hopefully helpful, constructive way. And then the kind of law firms and the in-house teams get the benefit of kind of us going, look, don't try that. That didn't work there. Or if that's a key requirement for you,
Yeah.
that particular vendor, not, because a lot of the tools do everything these days, don't they? So it's kind of like what's strong on what and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a nice, unique position. And you're right. There's so many people out there. And they are small businesses, like 1 to 10 people type thing, that are those kind of, is conduit the right word? So
Yeah,
small cog I like,
yeah,
because it's
yeah,
like, as you say, it's kind of bringing those bigger players in the ecosystem together. And there's not enough out there. When people ask me about kind of, when other people come to me and talk about partnerships and stuff like that, it's like, absolutely, because there's not enough people out there that are able and willing to be that kind of translator
yeah.
in between. Yeah.
I think that's a good way to describe it, translator, because I think there's you often, and we're a product company, and quite often I talk to prospects and clients through one lens. I'm not thinking about through multiple products or multiple lenses, and that translator kind of opportunity of, so here's your challenge. Okay, fine, but here's the 5 things that you could go after, and here's the one that we'd recommend you look at this because it solves this particular pain point that you've got. I think it's sort of it talks to a couple of things, and I think I'd like to get your take on it actually, because there are lots of software now out there, little baby bits of software, big bits of software, and I think that that creates a really hard sort of job for the buyers of legal tech, whether you're in the legal ops side of things or you're in the law firm side of things, innovation, knowledge. There's 5 flavors of everything, and maybe even more than 5. You know what I mean? And it's really hard to then sort of narrow in on what might be right for you. How do you see some of your clients coping with the fact? And obviously, you're gonna it's a slant around Doc Auto, but just generally, how is there sort of buyer fatigue? Is there too much choice perhaps in terms of what we the vendor are offering and stuff?
Yeah, I think there's so many software companies out there, and an added layer of complexity these days is that rather than software tools being focused on one task, there are tools now that can do 5 or 6 or 7 different tasks.
Yeah.
So an example would be like CLM tools. And when an in-house team used to come to us and say we need CLM, what some want and need is a repository to store executed documents with really smart intelligent search, because they've either just had an audit or they could have an audit at any point, and they need to be able to get their hands on stuff that's been saved somewhere else. What other people mean when they come to us and say that is they need a better way to triage requests, push workflows based on particular things that come through. There are CLM tools out there that will, do a bit of all of those, but
Yeah.
some are very strong on some bits and some are more strong on others. So for the buyers, it's extremely important, and it's going back to boring, but it's to really drill down on what are our requirements before you see any tech.
Yeah.
And that's really hard, because sometimes, within law firms, if it's in the doc auto situation, it's a partner's met someone at a conference and really liked what they saw. They go to the tech team or the head of IT or the head of knowledge management, and they say, we should get this. And it's like, well, we don't know that meets our requirements. So it's always sometimes like difficult to do that. And hopefully that's where that, kind of the people out there like myself and the other sort of consultants in this space, we know kind of the questions to ask you to get the requirements out, but also of the vendors to get at the real truth. So, simple example is with document automation. Say you've got like 5 warranties that you need in a list.
Yeah.
They'll all say they can do text selection, and you can pick 1 or 2 or 3 of them. And this is so boring, but like, if there's only 1, it needs to be like 1 sentence with a full stop. If there's 2, it needs to be semicolon and then the next one. If it's 3, it needs to be . Things like asking, for lawyers drafting legal contracts, things like asking how the software deals with lists, punctuation of lists, is not something that a business analyst in the tech team is going to know to ask.
Yeah.
But if you buy a tool that can't do that and can't update cross-references and can't produce suites of documents when actually you would always have a notice that goes alongside that contract, then the lawyers aren't going to be happy with it, even if it's got 100 other whizzy things and a really shiny front end. So it's knowing the questions to ask that's really, really difficult for buyers. But doing that work up front will save so much time later on.
It comes back to the hard yards, doesn't it? I mean, once upon a time, I was one of those business analysts working in a law firm, sort of taking requirements from lawyers about software that they either wanted or they wanted the IT team to build. Coming over to the vendor side, it's interesting. You sort of getting to the truth of something, because oftentimes, I mean, I'm not deeply technical in any way, shape, or form. I've never tried to be. I don't think I was ever capable of actually being deeply technical. But I wouldn't know the answer to the question that you just posed about our document automation capabilities inside of our platform. I wouldn't know it until I asked the question to find out if it was, and then I'd remember it somewhere in here somewhere. And I think that comes down to actually something that I was talking to somebody else about on the podcast that hasn't gone out yet. We're talking about how vendors partner with clients and sort of drive a slightly different sort of relationship that isn't vendor and client. It's much more of a partnership, and it's just a different lens to look at how you're doing business and how you're trying to drive that forward. But I think it is really tricky. I can't imagine being on the law firm side and going, right, I want to do X, Y, Z. And you do a quick search on Legal Tech Hub, or you do something else, and you've got a vague idea of your requirements, but hard yards of requirements fully before you look at anything. And you go, right, there's 12 things I could choose. Where do you start? What do you do?
Yeah.
It is really tricky.
We generally just like to break it down into its simplest kind of form. What we recommend is that you start off with your requirements gathering workshop and get someone that really fully understands these products in that particular area well to do
Yeah.
that. And you go through that requirements gathering exercise, and they then scan the market for you and come back to you with the top three. So that's like one of the main services we do with the Doc Auto,
Yeah.
is we take you through like 75 key questions, add any bespoke ones, verify it with the vendors so that our clients don't get then chased by like 20 different vendors, get it down to three within like a 2-week turnaround. So rather than 3 months of a business analyst and hundreds of people within the firm having to see loads of demos, just get it down to the top three. Then you do your RFP process. Your firm might have one already, but the best thing to do is to take your requirements and turn those into the RFP,
Yeah.
just to get those vendors to validate against it, and get your infosec and your IT team involved at that point as well. Not to do a full infosec, but to say what are any red flags. So if there's
Yeah.
any on those top three, you can just cut them out immediately because they wouldn't pass. Or even maybe before that stage in your requirements, go, what are the 3 things that these vendors would have to have or they won't even get through?
Yeah, exactly.
Your head of IT will love you for doing that because you're getting them involved early and not
Yeah.
going to surprise them in 6 months' time. But also the vendors appreciate it because they're like, we don't want to be involved if we're not going to get through later down the line. So
Yeah.
do that. And then once you've done your RFP, then do a pilot with, this isn't just Doc Auto, this is any legal tech. Just in terms of what we've seen over the 10 years of doing this with clients and learning from mistakes that we've made, then you do your pilot with either 1 or 2, depending on whether you're really close to compare or whether there's an outright leader. Keep that pilot shorter than 8 weeks. And in terms of like stakeholders involved and that kind of thing. And then from there, do your rollout. And that sounds simple to say, it's a 4-step process, but the number of people that don't follow that order of things, they go straight to step 3, or, they see one demo and go straight to a pilot of that tool before they've worked out the requirements or whatever. So just, it sounds boring, but requirements, RFP, pilot, rollout, will just get you so much further when it comes to successful implementation. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, and it's sort of that makes a 100% sort of common sense, because, and you're right, it isn't just Doc Auto. It's so of any solution, you sort of sat there and you sort of go out there. I think what's really interesting, what you said, is that oftentimes law firms, as you say, will go off and they'll have a business analyst and they'll spend 3 months scouring the market, but the business analyst isn't an expert, if that makes sense. They're not. They understand the concepts and they understand the logic and everything else, and they can write good documentation and write good requirements and user stories and all that sort of stuff. But they aren't deeply embedded in the industry. They're not deeply embedded in the sort of the nuances of things. And I think that kind of accelerated turnaround from a consultancy like yours makes 100% sense. 100% sense.
This sounds like I'm doing a full sales pitch. I'm not.
No,
it's just when you talk about kind of like, how hard is it for the law firms and stuff, it's like, it really is. And that's what we've been trying to do, is how do we help everyone go forward? When we realized we were seeing a different demo every week. And at one point we realized just for Doc Auto alone, there was more than 250 different vendors.
Yeah.
And it was just like, how do we cut through this noise, and what do we do? And yeah, we're like, Peter, who I work very closely with, Peter Duffy, he's doing some work at the moment for several law firms, like piloting different tools, or looking into, kind of what the best tools for different things are in more in the Gen AI space. So whether that be pre-execution contract review, which is obviously a big area for in-house teams, or post-execution review for law firms doing due diligence and that kind of thing. But really just applying those what to people that maybe have never practiced as lawyers and are more in kind of tech or product. They see these methodologies as obvious, but the thing is they're really not. Like I had to reword an email today, a comms email that's going to go out to a load of partners about a change that's coming within their law firm and how we need their help. And the reason I had to reword it was because it was all project management speak. So there was a lot of using the word users rather than lawyers or SMEs. And I'm like, they're not going to know what an SME is. It referred to sprints. And I kind of changed that to phases, even though sprints is the proper word for what we're doing in this instance. But you've got to play to your audience. Yeah.
I mean, but that comes down to the translator, the word, the descriptor that you used before. You've got to be able to talk clearly to people, and translation isn't just in the choosing of the tech; it's driving adoption. How do you drive adoption? Well, you're actually talking to the lawyers in the way that they would expect to be spoken to, rather than in sort of IT speak as such. Quick bullets, really. 3 things. So you just said something which I didn't realize, but there's like 250 doc auto tools out there. How, aside from the fact that there seems to be a lot more than I thought there was, what are the things that you're seeing in the doc auto space that sort of has come out in the last sort of 2 or 3 years that's really driving change, driving sort of opportunity? Because doc auto is doc auto, but actually it can be a really vital part of sort of the delivery of legal services at scale or very specific things. So what are you seeing out there in the marketplace that's sort of driving interest from your side?
I'm not surprised that you were surprised at the 250 figure, because when I started 10 years ago, there was 3. There was Hot Docs, Contract Express, and Exari. So getting to that number quite so quickly was surprising to all of us, to be honest. We got that figure by kind of doing a scan to start with. It was like a scrape of the internet of anyone that kind of had like document automation, document assembly, and the word legal within it. And we then narrowed that down. There's about, in terms of main players for large law firms and in-house, I would say there's about 40 that you'd pay attention to at the moment.
Wow. That's still
it's still big. It is still big. The differences between them are vast. So what we did was we went out to all of them and we sent them a questionnaire and said, do you want to be included in this? So we have the answers to those kind of 75 key requirements that we ask clients what's a must-have, what's priority, that kind of thing. And the differences are vast in terms of lots of things, like the way they price, the way they can be set up, whether it's, really, really low code or whether it needs someone, quite in depth, the integrations that they're capable of, that kind of thing. I think the reason for it, to come back to your question of kind of what's been happening the last 2 or 3 years, the reason for the explosion is, one, just easier to launch tech companies these days. Lawyers getting fed up and kind of going, I've got an idea, why is there not something to do this? And they launch a company before they maybe check whether there's something that does that already. And they go, I found the best new thing that no one's ever done before. It's like, well, 249 others have. But the main thing, I think, is that although document automation has been around, and it's true, tried and tested, it works when it's done right. It's been around for 20 to 30 years, I would say. It's never achieved the scale it should have, So if you think about, like, we all send email now rather than sending letters by post in the legal industry, though recently I have had a conveyancer that's been sending me an email going, please find attached, and it's a letter that their secretary's typed that they've attached to an email. There's another story, it really annoys me. So why are lawyers drafting documents in a way, in the old way, when this is available and new? Why is it not achieved scale? And I think we've really reached a point at the moment where we did have quite a lot of success with tools like Contract Express and Hot Docs and things over the last 10 years. But we've reached a bit of a plateau. And the reason I'm not speaking at Legal Geek this year is because last year I stood up and basically said, this is hard, folks. If we think about the nuances and what's involved, the reason, it's hard, and this is how you might alleviate some of those bottlenecks and those problems. But I'm almost starting to question myself in terms of what I've been recommending for years as, is that a right approach?
Yeah.
Because it seems to be we're at a point where it doesn't matter if we add more and more resource, or regardless of the tool to a point, we still don't seem to be achieving that scale. So what's going on? So I've been looking again right at the practice and changing some of the things. So I think we've got to the point where we were shouting for so long about to law firms of, you need to put resource in, you need legal engineers, you need legal tech people focusing on this. What's almost happened is those teams have got so progressed and business as usual now, teams within the law firms, that they've now become gatekeepers to things, that they've got a lot of work on and a lot of priorities, and getting a team over here's document that maybe only 20 people draft, but they might draft regularly and is useful to them, automated, or this one maintained. I had a firm recently who had a 9-month backlog of maintenance requests to get their documents automated because of a load of like changes the LMA, the Loan Mortgage Association, sent through. So that seems, and it doesn't matter how many bodies you throw at it. When I first started, we also were all going to knowledge management conferences. It wasn't legal tech conferences. Those two seem to have split. I'd be interested in how many knowledge management lawyers are going to Legal Geek this week. Hopefully loads, but I don't think that's the case. And they should be. It seems to have moved away from knowledge, become its own kind of thing, and the content's been lost. And I think with document automation, we really need to be asking the question, do we need to push that back to knowledge? And with all these tools coming through, whether it's traditional doc auto, whether it's generative AI, drafting assistance, knowledge needs to have a lot more ownership. So some of the tools that are coming through and are starting to take work away from the large incumbents. So there's several law firms we're working with at the moment are completely switching from one of the incumbents to a new tool, is giving that power back. So the low code in the truest sense, and allowing the knowledge lawyers or the lawyers themselves to do some of the automation. That's a big change happening. Another thing coming through is the introduction of more automated automation. So where the software itself is guessing what you want to do when you start to say what you need to do, or looking at the square brackets and interpreting those themselves.
Yeah. Okay. And that's, I think that sort of falls generally in line with what I've sort of seen. And I talk to people quite a lot in innovation teams and everything else. And it's really hard, because the innovation team originally, when you and I first heard of the first innovation sort of legal engineers, and I know Peter and the guys at Wavelength sort of coined it ultimately, and including you, but ultimately the sort of, as that became more mainstream, it became a home for things rather than a service. And the service was always, how can we do things in shit? How can we test things that aren't in the main IT or KM space? How can we then give it back to them to then drive it forward and do it? And it became home things for BAU. We'll have some product owners and we'll do this, and we'll do that, and we'll do this, and sort of, okay, so you've now got knowledge that drives some legal tech. You've got CIOs driving the hardcore tech. And then you've got this pocket in the middle, and I think we've inadvertently created that sort of an additional silo, this additional sort of gatekeeper, as you called it. And I think that's always really tricky in terms of how do you do innovation and R&D well, and then drive it back out into the business as a BAU thing rather than own it, because you should be providing a service to do something and ship it and get rid of it. Yes.
It seems to me more and more the firms I talk to these days, those teams are feeling that they're very tech led.
Yes.
So it seems that it's more these days of, we have this tech, let's go and find tasks and transactions and departments within the firm that could use it. What seems to have stopped happening, which should be continually happening, it's not that you do it 6 years ago and you never do it again, is just the basic process mapping of what the lawyers are doing every day, and then continuously iterating that. There's 5-6 years ago, there seemed to be a big focus on process mapping. It's almost unheard of these days. So these teams don't have the people walking the corridors anymore, the workshop kind of thing, unless they're tech-led workshops where it's, we've got something that can do due diligence, so let's go talk to the due diligence team, rather than let's go talk to the corporate lawyers about what they're doing every single day and what all the stages and tasks are of a transaction.
And I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we're a process automation platform. We live in that sort of hard yards of process, and very often we talk to the prospects, and we sort of having conversations, and they go, yeah, we've got a 10-step process that includes 5 different stakeholders, and then you map the process, and it's like it's a 20-stage process, not a 10-stage, and it's got 50 different stakeholders, and it's like, oh, it's a much bigger thing than we thought it was. And I said, and I think you're right in terms of there was a big drive towards sort of understanding processes and mapping those processes, but I think the mapping of those processes never made it out of a Visio diagram or some other
Yes.
tool.
I was just going to ask you, I was going to say, when you do you do it within your software itself, like straight away? Or do you, because it's something that I see pop up on LinkedIn all the time of what do people use as the software to do it? Like I use Draw.io quite a lot of the time, which is so simple. And I take a photo, sometimes I'll take a photo of a flowchart that I've kind of drawn on a piece of paper as a start for 10 and it automatically turns it in. But obviously that's not like full layer detail. What do you use?
So, well, we sort of, we've got a process canvas. So when we're very, very early, it's almost like your classic business case canvas type thing. And we sort of go, what are the main things? What are you got to think about? So it's asking very explicit questions around your stakeholders, your integrations, your things like that. Then we use, since COVID, I mean, and we're fully remote, we do some in-person workshops, but we do a lot of whiteboarding on Miro, for example.
Brilliant.
And it's like, okay, well, give us your back of a fag packet process, and then we'll put it onto here as an image, and then we'll sort of start extrapolating it down. And then we might then go, instead of just finishing there, we'll say, right, your homework is to go and add to this. And we'll then have a sort of a sister version. And then what we'll then do typically is, because we're data driven, we can do doc auto and we can do other bits and pieces, but because we're data driven, one of the real hard things to do is, once you've got the process, it's then going, okay, what are your data points? What do you need to be capturing? What does the system need to be doing from statuses and phases and sprints and all the other bits and pieces? What are your outputs? What do you need? And then that's where people can draw pictures on Miro all the time. But if you say, right, give me your 50 data points for your contract, they'll go, okay, yeah. Because they've probably done it in a doc auto tool already. But so they've got them, and ultimately that's quite easy, but it's then sort of translating that into what they do next. And then I don't like the low code, no code kind of terminology, but then it's quite quick and easy to get it into our system because you can move stuff around and have it. And I think that's typically how we do it, but it is really, it's very visual. It's quite sort of it's human centered, if that makes sense. It's not.
It's so important.
We don't show our technology until not the very last, but we don't get into the weeds of the tech. We don't start live building or anything else. It's like, let's get this right. Because I was at a knowledge conference. You were talking about knowledge professionals and everything else last week, briefing with Sarah and the guys, and it was a really good day. And there was I think it was a keynote speaker. I can't remember the lady's name because I'm a terrible human and I don't have my notes in front of me. But she was talking about the risk of oversimplification. And it's like, what we do and what lawyers do is complex. Now, you can use technology to reduce that complexity, but ultimately it's still a complex process. It's still a complex output. And you still want it in a particular way. And I think that with the rise of SaaS platforms, and I'm as guilty as that because I've HiQ and everything else, is a drive to oversimplify things, I think. And I think people should be embracing the complexity, embracing the hard yards, because that's when you get most value. But it's easy to say. It's a lot harder to enact inside of a business when everyone is drowned by Gen AI and drowned by the BAU and drowned by everything else, and you sort of get lost a little bit. So always a little bit hard.
I agree with what that person said in terms of beware of oversimplifying, because as soon as you get to a point where I always talk about when you don't have an other box. So, you ask a question and is it A or B? You have to always start with have an other box and then start collecting the data to go, look, 70% of the time they're saying other. So what are the other options? We need to have drafting for those other options. And people that just, kind of will go, oh, just A or B, then the lawyers will get annoyed and not use the tool because it's like, it never works for my things, but they don't often tell people. They just stop using it. So you always have to have that other book. But then equally, the power of just getting started and having the simple diagram and the simple workshop to go, okay, what you do is so nuanced. And yes, if we're being truthful, there's probably going to be 1,000 different possible permutations once we really scale this
Yeah.
out. I think I did something once, and I shared the diagram on LinkedIn, where it was just by asking the first 5 questions involved in a corporate SPA transaction, you end up with, it was something like 64 different possible, results that could
Yeah.
come up. With the just getting started and going, okay, but here's the main 5 steps of your transaction. And then, as you say, going, right, your homework is that step 4, signature,
Yeah.
or that first step, getting clients' instructions, go build that one out. It really just helps so much, because we all suffer from that kind of blank page paralysis, where we're like, I don't know where to start, so I'm just not going to, and I'm going to ignore it. And it's the type of thing that when you do, and everyone's beating up on, not everyone, many people are beating up on Gen AI.
Yeah.
For one, I am loving it for getting me past that blank page paralysis.
Yeah.
And the number of times nowadays that we can help knowledge lawyers and subject matter experts to get started on coming up with the questionnaire for the document, simply by going, what are the top 10 questions you would ask a tenant of a commercial property when you're starting on their, transaction? And it just gives them 10 headings
Yeah.
to get started with.
Yeah.
There's so many areas where that's true, where it doesn't have to be accurate, it just needs to be mind joggers,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get you there. And
Yeah.
the simple documents, and you started by saying the back of a fag packet process, it's key to getting started. And I remember, like, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, being not the fee earner, but the legal engineer involved internally when we got one of the big 4 in to process map something. And it was very much a series of really long workshops for 8, 9 lawyers. And then they went away for 6 weeks and came back with a really complex process map, but there was no iteration.
No.
And that's all we got. And then there was, what do we do with it? There was no let's work on this together and build it up together and everything else. And it was a swim lane diagram that literally went round the entire room when you played it out. And I think that, and the price for it was just mental. So I'm glad we've come a long way and people are happy to get on a workshop together and use Miro to build stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, and we use it as a canvas, really, and it's just ideas.
Yeah.
And I think what typically happens is that we get adopted by a particular customer for solving one thing, and actually during that process, some of the stakeholders go, "I've got a similar thing that I can now use. I've now got another bit of technology that I can use for other things." And I think that's a big part of our sort of customer growth that we've seen over the last couple of years. People just go, I've got many flavors of this that I can now sort of I relate to this. And I think one of the things that we were chatting to somebody about mapping their processes, and they said, and they went, look, I've got an A4 binder, and they literally had them all printed out for some kind of it was some kind of risk audit type thing. And we've got all our processes. Look, and I'm going, well, where's the digital versions? Can you just? And they had to scan them and send them to me because they didn't have the digital version. So it
I
was like
know.
they literally mapped their process, but
Yeah.
thing with it, it was like a
Oh, wow.
checkbox exercise. And I'm going, oh my god,
Yeah.
the opportunity to add like value across the top of that real hard work. But obviously, 5 years down, they were printed, they were there, and the business has changed. So you sort of start to look at that. It's always a bit fun.
It is lovely though when you do meet a customer who's already had a go at mapping stuff, isn't it? Or coming up with those checklists. Like anyone that says to me, I've got a checklist for that, I'm like, yes, let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
We're already so far further ahead. But maybe hopefully having them not just in paper.
But you're not having to educate somebody on the benefit of it. You're having it's like there's a checklist, because I've thought about what a lawyer might need to do. It's like, okay, that's amazing, because then you can map it and you can identify everything and start to track it, and then get into the bit that we love, which is, okay, well, what data points do you need for each of the points of the checklist? Is that, and they go, oh, and then they go off and start sort of coming up with all these crazy things. You mentioned, I mean, every single episode of this podcast has got some kind of flavor of Gen AI in it, and you talked about sort of the benefit of sort of that starter for 10 on things that don't have to be accurate, if that makes sense. And I think it's one of those things that we've spent a lot of time thinking about inside of Autologics. There's a lot of stuff that I do in my job because I do like 20 different jobs. I have to context switch all the time, but I use it all the time. I use it all the time to sort of give me ideas for marketing, for questions, for podcasts, for things like a whole bunch of stuff. But you're right, it doesn't have to be, it's not critical that it gets it right. It's just got to be in the right kind of direction. And I think in our industry, there's so much emphasis on right, and that is correct. It has to be right. That I think we've like everyone's gone head on into this whole, well, it's not quite right, or it might potentially be right eventually. You start to build out that sort of stuff, and I sort of, I'm, I know, I'm one of these people that is yet to be seen how effective it will actually get. I mean, the rate of change is ridiculous, but how effective it will get to be in an actual lawyer's hands drafting something that's right, correct. I remember, and I think it was something that you said off the back of somebody, another industry person, who said it's going to be the death of Doc Auto as we know it type thing, really early on, and it was like that's a bold statement, quite frankly. I mean, yes, and probably not for maybe 5 years. But
Yeah.
what are you seeing your clients sort of doing? What are you seeing the other vendors in the Doc Auto space doing? Because obviously, it's sort of there's aspects of it. So
So for when you're trying to draft a document for the first time, where you have a precedent, or as they call it in the States, a template, where you have a tried, trusted, firm-wide precedent, Doc Auto is the if then else logic that just can't be changed, is the right solution for that, preparing a first draft of that document in a faster way than manually doing it on Word or by hand. Where you don't have a precedent to start with, the best thing would be that you have resource and a KM lawyer that would start and would prepare you a firm-wide one that everyone agreed with, was peer-reviewed and agreed with, and you would automate that. Sometimes that's done by getting previous examples by that knowledge manager and then working up what's right for you. Sometimes they go to PLC, get that version, and they make it right for their firm. So using Gen AI to help with that process of getting a firm-wide agreed precedent, I don't see a problem with, as long as it's, seriously tested, reviewed,
yeah,
agreed, because it's just that by a human and then peer reviewed, because it's just getting to that first point before it's then automated and done. A lawyer, though, starting with nothing and just going, draft me a SPA or whatever, that's not going to work, because everything you send out every day is going to potentially be different, even if people go, oh, but we can turn the temperature to 0. Stop. In the future, possibly, but it's like in the future when we have all of those precedent clauses saved as the ones that point towards that your firm want and trust. So the middle bit, the preparation of a first document from tried and trusted thing, Doc Auto is right for. Gen AI can help in getting you unusual bespoke clauses, getting a precedent to start with in the first place that is then human reviewed and agreed, and then you automate it.
But I think there is over the last couple of years, there's been a massive push to adopt and drive stuff without a truly clear view of the exact use cases and therefore the ROI of the investment. There are some firms that have done a really good job. There are some other firms that are just fast following and just going, oh, I'll do that because that seems like it's a good thing. And I think we're still, my feel is that when sort of Noah sort of started Kira and all of that sort of that inflection point of quite the not the original AI, but that kind of AI term extraction stuff that sort of picked up 2015, 2016. Gen AI is coming in, but we're still on that curve. We've not adopted the original technology really well, not the original, but that kind of extract. We've not made the most of that, and now we're moving on to something else. But it's still part of the same journey. I think it's not a different thing. It's part of the same thing.
And someone said to me the other day, and it was a really good point. Is look at the the legal market and the number of law firms, and then look at something like that tool, like Akira, and then the post-extraction contract review, the due diligence tools out there that everyone's focusing on. How many firms in practice do more than one of those type of deals a month?
Yeah.
So yes, it's a use case and a task, and it's one that's very expensive, that if you could do faster, you make quite a lot of money on. But in terms of the day-to-day work that lawyers are doing every day, it's not a big percentage of what they're doing.
And I've seen. So it's been interesting. So you might go out and buy a sort of a legal specific Copilot. I mean, there are a bunch of them out there. I've heard a lot of people really bashing Microsoft Copilot because it's not quite ready for legal and things like that. And you sort of wouldn't expect it to, because it's going to help you build pivot tables of your data, and it's going to help you make your PowerPoint presentation nicer. But it's not tapped into your underlying your underlying resource. I could talk to you for probably another 17 years, Catherine, but I'm not going to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save it. I'm going to save the best bits to Wednesday and Thursday when I get to see you in real life. But it's going to be awesome. Thank you very much for this. It's been a really great chat. You're always super articulate and clever and sort of industry, and I love it. So thank you very much. I will see you on Wednesday and catch you very soon. Thank you.